Hello everyone! Recently I posted on my channel a chat I had with Tessa Kramer about her very insightful thesis on the reluctance of futures and foresight professionals to become a ding-sing profession. And something very interesting happened. The chat was negatively shared on LinkedIn along with a very negative comment by someone who believes that futurists, in other words those who practice futures and foresight, should not become a ding-sing profession. And the post attracted a number of other comments by equally minded individuals in support of that argument. And I thought this is a very intriguing and very common point of view, which I believe is also rather misplaced and illogical. So in this video I would like to try to show what I believe are rather profound logical inconsistencies with this very common argument, with a disclaimer that this video is not meant to attack anyone in particular. Rather, I want to use this opportunity to objectively lay out the pros and the cons of this very common argument, an argument that I found, after careful analysis, to have many more cons than pros. So let's start by analyzing the argument itself. Now, the original post and the following comments together are a big chunk of text, but the gist of it is the following. The idea that futures and foresight should not professionalize is the main argument. This is supported by three related supporting arguments. The first supporting argument is that if we become a profession, that is a form of gatekeeping that will keep many people away from the practice of imagining the future. This is in turn supported by a second supporting argument, that is, the future belongs to everyone. Everyone should be able and have the capacity to think effectively about the future. And by a third supporting argument, that is, ideas about the future are more important than processes. You cannot and should not gatekeep ideas. And in fact, the field of futures and foresight is more driven by intuition rather than formal structure. Given this point of view, we should not have any form of qualification, especially academic qualifications. Now, this argument might sound appealing and well-structured, and in fact it has some valid points. That is, it argues for something that we've heard a lot recently, democratizing the future, which has to do with the idea to make cognitive tools to imagine the future originally available to a few, now available to everybody. And that is the response to the opposite unfortunate tendency, colonizing the future, where the future is only imagined and planned by a restricted elite. Now, there is no doubt that democratizing the future is desirable, but the problem with this argument is that if we look closely, it is actually against democratization. Therefore, it is highly illogical. Let's see why. Let's think, how can we achieve democratization of the future? Well, that would be possible if the great majority of individuals globally were able to think about the future and shape it effectively for themselves and for others, including the communities they live in and the organizations they work for. But when we're talking about a great majority of individuals, well, that is a lot of people, and people are different. They're different in language and nationality, they're different in educational background and life experiences, and most importantly, they're different in interests. In other words, the intent they want to use futures and foresight for. That could be for personal reasons, for business reasons, or you name it. For example, imagine someone as different as a CEO in Europe wishing to use scenarios for her business together with her employees, and an 11-year-old kid in a village in Ghana who hears about futures and foresight and really wants to learn how to imagine possible futures of better access to water together with his close community. So let's do a foresight thought experiment. In what future scenario would that be possible to reach this great variety of individuals? Well, it would be possible with widespread education, when futures and foresight is taught extensively on a global level, both in person and online. And how would that be possible? Well, that would be possible if many individuals globally were able to spend their time, in other words, their career, practicing, studying and researching futures and foresight so that they can teach and encourage it. And we indeed need a great variety of individuals for that to meet the demand, so that both the CEO in Europe and the kid in Ghana will be able to learn in their own respective language. And in this desirable scenario, ideally, what should we teach? Well, we should teach things that work. In other words, cognitive tools to think about the future that we know are effective because they have been proven to be so regardless of personal bias. And the key here is regardless of personal bias. For example, we would need to be able to teach the European CEO which specific scenario planning method works best for her specific corporate foresight goal, and the kid in Ghana which specific foresight engagement tool works best for his goal, because they have been proven to do so. And for that, we need scientific theory about foresight. In other words, we need theory that rigorously explains, after careful research, why, how, where, when, and to whom foresight works at best. Which, by the way, is a giant misconception, because many people erroneously believe that scientific theory is meant to make the foresight process more scientific, but in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. Scientific theory doesn't even want to touch the creativity and intuition in a foresight process, it only wishes to study it in order to gain a better understanding of it. From this, we understand that the notion that foresight ideas are more important than foresight processes simply crumbles down. We need to know the process by which ideas work, otherwise how to make our ideas stick. For example, the kid in Ghana might have the best ideas to revolutionize future water management, but if it cannot get it done, then futures and foresight is of no use. Therefore, foresight processes, which are theoretical in nature, are at least as important as foresight ideas. So how can we make sure to create and teach these valuable theories on foresight? Well, we can make sure of that if academic institutions and schools all over the globe employed researchers and scholars to do research on foresight. And the same institutions should be able to guarantee that those who teach foresight actually teach good theory. From this, we understand that in order to really democratize futures and foresight and not to gatekeep it, we not only need academic qualifications, but we need two kinds, one for those who do research and one for those who teach. And it is arguably desirable that some of those who teach foresight also have experience in practice, so they will be able to enrich their teachings of theory with practical examples, advise researchers on what theory is most urgently needed, and potentially redirect researchers when their theory becomes too abstract, so that tension is actually healthy. It follows that the argument that if we want to democratize the future, we should not professionalize, sort of falls down. And the idea that futures and foresight researchers and teachers are in any way precluding normal individuals with no interest in teaching or researching futures and foresight, but only in using it on a daily basis from actually being able to do so, becomes nonsense when we realize that the life purpose of teachers and researchers is actually to expand knowledge and make it more available. In fact, you might certainly have some outliers saying, I only can do foresight because I have a degree. In reality, most of researchers and teachers are very well intentioned in that they want to expand knowledge. Plus, we need to take into account that just because people are different, many learners of futures and foresight are not willing to engage with the level of details that researchers and teachers are willing to engage with. So we need to have that options for those who want to engage with deep thought about futures and foresight, and that option is academic programs. But let me prove this further. Let's go back to our foresight thought experiment. Let's think of a scenario where a great majority of individuals globally want to learn more about futures and foresight, so the demand is high, but unfortunately very few people are able to teach or research it, so the supply is low. This scenario is not so desirable in terms of democratizing the future, isn't it? Well, ironically, this scenario resembles the present more than the scenario I just described to you. So if anything, if we really want to democratize the future, we really need more academic credentials and more academic programs. Now, at this point, some of you might say, yes, but thinking about the future is an innate capability. We don't need anyone to teach it to us. If we're interested, we can just pick it up. Well, yes, maybe futures and foresight is an innate capability. But given that in our today's society, it is very clear that individuals are not thinking about the future so effectively, and I don't need to tell you why, well, maybe we need researchers and teachers to focus on resurrecting that innate capability, which, by the way, is the starting point of a scientific theory by itself. In fact, if we compare futures and foresight to any other innate capabilities, such as eating and walking, we will soon realize that we badly need experts in those capabilities in our today's society. And we need them for two reasons. The first is that we might want to optimize those capabilities. And the second is that we might want to solve some problems we are facing with them. For example, even if walking is innate, we have posture specialists. Even if eating is innate, we have nutritionists, and we need them. So even if Futures and Foresight is innate, we do need Futures and Foresight specialists. So if it is so clear that we need to professionalize in Futures and Foresight, why are so many people within our community still resisting this? Well, there is another reason for that doesn't have much to do with the argument of democratizing the future. That reason is rather profound, often unspoken. That reason is fear. Fear of unemployment, especially by those who are practicing Futures and Foresight, but who do not have a degree. One of the comments on the post that I mentioned at the beginning of this video really said it all. It went like this: new generations want a degree. They don't recognize those whose knowledge was acquired through self-study or the university of life. However, I contend that this fear is also rather misplaced. In fact, I am very active in the community of researchers and teachers, those who do have a degree, and I can guarantee that we value experts in practice enormously. We really badly wish to partner up with them in order to get some ideas. That's where we get some of our best ideas to create scientific theory. So thanks so much for listening. Again, this video was not meant to attack anyone in particular. It was just meant to dispel some concerns regarding a common argument that I found to have rather illogical foundations. If you like this video, I would super appreciate to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I will have many more videos on Futures and Foresight coming up in the future. Ciao!